Hey, detoxers. Welcome to a special episode of the Disinfo Detox. No, your eyes aren't deceiving you. The number of Higdons on this program are multiplying. I'm joined today by my cousin, James Higdon, at-large Republican Party of Kentucky from 2021 to 2025. James Higdon, welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
It's a pleasure to be on here, Nolan. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for doing this. Obviously folks don't know this, but you and I text all the time behind the scenes about what's going on in the world of politics. And so it's cool to get a chance to talk about it on air. And the reason I wanted to have you on here today is I want to talk about Kentucky versus Trump within the GOP. I think it's a story that gets little national coverage, but I think some of these battles within the party, particularly in the state of Kentucky, are kind of interesting. And I guess, since you have intimate knowledge of this, I wonder, as someone in the state, can you kind of broadly paint a picture of sort of Trump's relationship with, say, the Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, Thomas Massies of the world in Kentucky?
Certainly, and probably do so with an emphasis on Thomas Massie, as he seems to be headlining most of the tension between the Trump agenda and what you see from certain GOP members here in Kentucky. I think at its core, there is a very unique type of politician that emanates from Kentucky. You kind of combine kind of the hard scrabble, old school politics that we have here with that just general independent streak that you would associate moving out of Appalachia westward along the boundary here in Kentucky. It's probably not inconceivable that you would have certain tension between the president and what for all of what you want to say about MAGA. It's not a very coherent ideological construct, right? It seems very much to be a response from the president, not necessarily based on his whims that day, but kind of empowering the president to have any tool at his disposal to take on whatever cultural phenomenon that the right generally seems to want to take on. So there's a great deal of deference that Kentucky voters give the president as president to do that. At the same time, there's a little bit of a nuance here when we send a senator to be a senator or we send a congressman to be a congressman. We expect them to have that kind of rock ribbed conservatism with some type of ideological rootedness. And only now does it really seem like that tension is manifesting itself in the headlines. But we're fortunate as voters that we don't necessarily have to vote for these folks on the same part of the ballot, and we are somewhat in a nuanced way bifurcating what we expect out of a U.S. senator and what we expect out of a president. And only in this kind of 2026 primary mode are we getting to the point where those may come to loggerheads, and Kentucky Republicans are having to reconcile where their allegiances lie.
Nice. And so to speak a little more to that, I know we're gonna get to Massey because believe me, there's a lot to say about Massey, but uh, something else I think outsiders are always interested in, and I should say I don't know if the audience knows, I was born in the state of Kentucky, although I've spent most of my life in California, but I go back there and visit frequently. And one thing that I've kind of struggled to understand living outside of Kentucky, and maybe you can help others who are thinking about this, is it does seem like such a Republican dominated state, but they have a very popular Democrat governor, one who's even being considered as possibly a 2028 run for the Democratic Party presidential run. So, can you kind of talk a little bit about kind of the electoral dynamics of how that happens in the state?
It's fascinating. And like most of the Southeast, Kentucky switched so red so quickly, we forget that it was not even a generation ago. A decade ago, we had a Democratic Speaker of the House in our House of Representatives. It was not uncommon for our statewide constitutional offices, governor's office, treasurer's office, et cetera, to be competitive in a general election. So there's still a lot of muscle memory in Kentucky. And allegiance to that kind of old school Democratic, what we call a blue dog Democrat politician here. And it is somewhat of a disconnect when you see that out of the 100 members of our state House of Representatives, 80 of them are Republicans. Yet, by the time we get through this full 4-year cycle, we will have had Democratic governors for 16 out of the last 20 years. I think for some Kentuckians, there's still once again that maybe some legacy Democratic tendencies, but we really do consider these candidates election by election, and really they reflect the circumstance going on in the state at the time. To the Bashir governorship in particular, we have off-cycle elections in Kentucky. For whatever historic reason, it led to that. Almost by design, our gubernatorial elections are separated from certainly presidential years or mid-years, and I think that allows a Democratic Party that has not really been competitive over the last 10 years at a district by district level to still have some statewide success. Some of that I will put on Republicans who have attempted to use the legislative authority to largely neuter the executive branch into almost a ceremonial role, almost a head of state role, and then leave much of the governance to the legislature. And as they've done that, it's kind of allowed the governor to be almost an empathizer in chief rather than a chief executive of the state. And I think even the most ardent Republican would agree that despite our issues with him as a governor, he has done that part very well through consecutive disasters and COVID, and largely earned the prerogative to have another 4 years here. I don't think that necessarily means that there's a disconnect among the Kentucky voter. I used the word nuance earlier. I think there's just a sense of the governor has occupies this lane, my state representative occupies this, U.S. senator, et cetera, and the vote largely reflects that kind of split ticket mentality that we have here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one of the mistakes, on this program, we talk a lot about media literacy. And I think one of the mistakes the national media make is they take national issues and put them on local races. And I think what you're speaking to right there is the difference between the two, right? At the local level, folks are thinking about local issues for the most part. Um, so let's talk about that because there's another, local race here that's becoming a national issue with Thomas Massie. And I want to get you to kind of speak to what is the divide between Thomas Massie and MAGA or Trump in particular. But for folks who don't remember, Massie has stood against Trump legislatively a handful of times, and Trump has threatened to primary Massie. And Elon Musk, who's in the midst of a will they won't they breakup with Trump, has said that he will back Massie with funding if and when Trump does try to primary Massie. So, can you kind of help us understand what is the divide between Massie and the Trump MAGA wing, and what do you make of this threat to primary and Elon's involvement in it?
Certainly. When we think of these tussles, it's very important to remember that Thomas Massie is not a creature of MAGA. He does not owe his electoral or career success to a 2016 or 2020 wave. He is very much a product of that brief moment in time when the Tea Party was truly an organic reaction, particularly in this state, from the perceived overreach of the Obama administration. Now we use trillion, and we don't even think about it really in terms of adding to a deficit or a spending bill. It's almost odd if it's not that. But at the time, that really drove a constituency of Kentucky Republicans to take another look at the Constitution and really value that rock-ribbed small c conservatism, small r republicanism. And Thomas Massie, through blessing of good timing on his behalf, really embodied that. He didn't kind of see that coming and recast himself as the Tea Party guy. This is a guy who lived off the grid. I think he actually used a homegrown Tesla battery to power his home. He is an MIT educated entrepreneur, and his businesses hold over 24 different patents and highly sophisticated areas of science and technology. So this person didn't just talk the talk. He walked the walk at a very specific time in Kentucky politics and at a point in which that fourth congressional seat was open. So he, completely independent of MAGA, completely preceding that, was able to carve out a lane, defeating a very popular county judge executive, which is our chief county administrator, former state rep, Those kind of emanated from the power center of that district. Thomas Massie comes a little outside of that, in a much more rural part of that. And so his brand was established long before Donald Trump came down the escalator. And that's what his constituents expect. It's very hard to guard your right flank in that congressional district. The primary is where the action is. That's where many state representatives have lost, competitive races there. Thomas Massie, for now 6 consecutive cycles, has been able to hold that, and that type of principle. And I think it's important to note selective opposition to Donald Trump, not reflexive like you would get out of a Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger. Displays a certain amount of seriousness that I know Thomas Massie's constituents value, and frankly, I think they expect that. So as this manifests itself in a potential primary challenge, I think political observers would bet today, where we sit mid-year, looking ahead to the May primary, that this may be, depending on who the challenger is, the closest fight Massie would have. But I think most people at the end of the day would prefer to be the incumbent than the challenger, regardless of the Trump endorsement or who is financing the opposition.
Because Trump has, well, seemingly been campaigning or in office for a decade now. Do you have any kind of indication of how that district feels about Massey standing up to Trump when he does? I mean, is that something that Massey tries to amplify as a point of celebration and fundraising, or is it something Massey tries to downplay? Do you have any kind of indication of how that plays in the district?
Sure, I think we'd be naive to think that some of this opposition does not come with the raise $50 for me email because I'm standing up for you after the fact. But I truly think in his heart of hearts, Thomas Massie has a fidelity to the Constitution and a willingness to defend that, even if it comes at some seeming political cost. And if you look at some of the Republican casualties that have not been able to figure out how to weave in and out of this MAGA ecosystem, either kind of talk tough and then capitulate at the end of the day, or you retire. You seldom kind of stick with that type of principled opposition. I think the one area where I do see daylight between that overlapping Venn diagram of the Massie supporter and the Trump supporter is on the Iran strikes, and insofar as that's a proxy for how you support Israel, I think is probably the one area where voters in that district will have to take a pause and wonder, is Thomas Massie really representing a big priority for me? I think that will manifest itself in a primary. I think that will have an animating, motivating factor for a potential opponent. But by and large, if you take a breath every 2 years and think, what has Thomas Massie done for me? And it's maintain fidelity to the Constitution, try to maintain some semblance of fiscal sanity. And I think voters want to reward him for that at the end of the day. And he's even achieved Trump's endorsement in 2022, right? So it's kind of a marriage of convenience and inconvenience. And I don't want to belabor this, but I think it is important for your listeners to think of, and it's a good reminder for us, is that the margins are so slim in the House of Representatives. Donald Trump, just if history has any indication, probably has another 18 months where he's going to have that Republican majority in the House, a little bit more flexibility in the Senate, but he has to kind of raise the cost of independent streaks within the conference. And so this is about Thomas Massie. It is about Donald Trump, but ultimately he has to corral, with such tight majorities, that independent streak that any congressman may have. And Nolan, I'm the first to criticize the president when I think he steps outside of bounds or norms. I think that's just politics, and sometimes we forget that there is a cost to discipline from the top when you have to kind of work with the Congress on so much of the agenda.
Really good point. And then, I don't know how big of a name he'll be in this, but the Democrats really seem to want to continue to focus on him being Elon Musk. Uh, what do you think? Do you think someone like Elon Musk? I mean, I'm sure money, as we know in the current state of politics, always helps. But do you think money coming from Elon is something that Massey is going to, downplay or amplify?
That's a great question. And I would suspect that'd be a tremendous amount of coordination between the two, because just as I mentioned about Trump needing to raise the cost of independence, I think Elon probably needs to establish a track record too. So insofar as they can either take credit or assign blame to however this election turns out, certainly he'll be a part of it. Ultimately, it's unclear to me at this point where the Kentucky voter lands on Elon. I think this is part of that Trump era where when you have these strange bedfellows, we're not processing that divorce as an electorate just yet. But I think by and large, there's still some goodwill that Elon created through the Doge process. I know there's a lot of interest among our General Assembly in doing something similar in Kentucky. So whether or not the Tesla or Musk brand is polling well or not, I think there's still some deference to what he did in his brief time within the White House. And I don't think for the Kentucky primary voter, especially in the 4th congressional district, there's any downside to having Elon's support.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift gears to the Senate because the part of the kerfuffle with Thomas Massie emerged from the so-called one big beautiful bill or mega bill or whatever name they want to call it. And another, national Kentucky Republican, Rand Paul, voted against that. He also critiqued Senator Lisa Murkowski for changing her vote on it. Rand Paul, I always find another kind of interesting figure. I think he fits in line well with what you've described about the kind of thin margins in Kentucky. But Rand Paul, what do you make of his opposition to Trump and these fights? He seems like someone who's never totally fell in line with Trump, but certainly is a hardened Republican. Can you kind of help us unpack how Rand Paul gets away with it without getting the ire of Trump?
Sure. And I think, we pinpoint these kind of selective moments when these rifts happen, but by and large, they're with the agenda for the bulk of the time, right? But I always find it interesting to go back and remember, the presidential supernova of Donald Trump hit so quickly, we forget who it displaced. And Rand Paul was kind of that next generation of the post-Obama, post-Bush Republican that you would really expect to be the front runner on that. And I don't know. I've never talked with Rand about how he felt about being displaced by President Trump, but I know we changed our primary rules here to accommodate Rand Paul both being on the Senate ballot and doing a caucus style during that 2016 primary. So not to say that there's any kind of legacy ill will there, but Rand Paul, once again, kind of a precursor to Massie. He endorsed Thomas Massie. Ron Paul had a great way of kind of leavening the discussion among that intense Kentucky primary voter. But ultimately, when you have a 6-year run as a U.S. Senator, it just affords you so much opportunity to vote your conscience more often. And just the Kentucky voters continue to reward him. And part of that, once again, is because there's nobody to the right flank. There are some performative kind of minor characters who I know would like to put forth that type of opposition, but there's been nobody who's been able to bridge that kind of pro-liberty MAGA fusionism along with your Kentucky Chamber of Commerce or Reagan Republicanism. Nobody's been able to figure out that secret sauce to displace any of those folks. And I don't know that will happen anytime soon.
Well, James Higdon, I could talk to you all day and probably will at the family reunion. But before I let you get out of here, you got anything you want to promote or plug if folks want to follow your work or get to know you better, anywhere they can look you up, find you?
No, I mean, my bread and butter is lobbying the Kentucky State Legislature, and I take great pains not to speak on behalf of my clients or anything like that. But if you do have any government affairs needs in Kentucky, I know you know how to reach me. And don't confuse me with the myriad other Jimmy Higdons and James Higdons who are authors, state senators, and all that. No relation. I don't think they'd claim us anyway, Nolan. But yeah. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
It's been great, man. Thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox. And thank you, Detoxers, for tuning in.
Thank you, Nolan.
Hey Detoxers, this is the Disinfo Detox. If you believe in media literacy for all, help us keep going, become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/disinfodetox. There's also plenty of free ways to support. You can like, comment, follow, or share. Every little bit helps. Thanks for supporting the Disinfo Detox, where media literacy meets breaking news.